There's a kind of battle that doesn't happen on a battlefield and not in front of armies. It happens in the invisible, in the mind, in the spirit. A kind of war that begins even before your victory, because the mere existence of a promise activates resistance. And Psalm 2 begins with a strange, unsettling, almost provocative question. Why do the nations rage and the peoples plot in vain? In other words, why so much agitation against something already decreed? Why such rebellion against what God has already established? This isn't just a historical question, it's a mental and spiritual one. And Napoleon Hill would answer clearly, every powerful idea activates proportional resistance. Hill taught that human beings carry within themselves two competing forces, faith and fear. And the greater the purpose you carry, the greater the invisible pressure trying to break your conviction. Psalm 2 reveals this, that a war is being waged not on earth, but in the unseen, against something heaven has already settled. The kings of the earth, which today may be interpreted as systems, ideologies, trends, culture, media, and internal voices, rise up not out of strength, but out of fear. Because they know that what comes from above cannot be controlled, only resisted. And anyone who decides to align with this eternal purpose, to become a co-author of God's promise, will provoke agitation. That's why Hill taught, success requires decision, decision requires courage, and courage activates opposition. The psalmist says the nations plot in vain. That's mental, that's vibrational. It's the realm of invisible suggestion trying to occupy the space that should belong to faith. The text talks about kings and peoples, but if you look closer, it's talking about thoughts, inner resistance, voices that rise up against the Anointed One. And in the New Testament, the Anointed One is you who carry the Spirit. So what the psalmist is saying is, there is constant pressure to dethrone the purpose that was activated inside you. And this attack doesn't come with weapons. It comes with thoughts, with noise, with fear, with confusion. Hill would say, your mind is under attack by distractions that exist to keep you from manifesting your decision. And the psalmist adds, the kings want to break their bonds. In other words, they want to disconnect you from your source. They want to sever your root. They want you to let go of the cord that keeps you grounded in God. And when you let go of that cord, you become like the raging nations. You lose your center. But the next verse changes everything. The psalm says, he who sits in the heavens laughs. God is not shaken by human rebellion, and you, as his child, don't need to be shaken by life's resistance. What has been decreed is sealed. What has been spoken over your life is already recorded in heaven. And Hill completes this thought with a brutal truth. The only real failure is the failure to decide to stay. In other words, if you don't quit, nothing can stop you. When heaven decrees, those who align prosper. Those who resist wear themselves out. But as for me, I have set my king on Zion, my holy mountain. Psalm 2:6. This verse is a turning point. It's not God giving a diplomatic response to rebellion. It's a final decree. In the midst of agitation, conspiracies, and vain imaginations of chaos, God doesn't argue. He affirms, he doesn't explain, he establishes. And in the mindset of Napoleon Hill, this is the spiritual equivalent of a definite, irreversible decision. Hill wrote that all extraordinary people he studied had one thing in common. They made quick and firm decisions and were rarely swayed once they committed. That's not stubbornness. It's clarity. It's alignment with something higher than the moment. Psalm 2 shows what happens when someone accepts the place that heaven has already decreed. I have set my king. This isn't a social election. It's not a democratic consensus. It's a divine decision. And if you understand what it means to carry the Spirit of God as one anointed, then this verse is also speaking about you. because you were called to reign in a realm where the kings of the earth rage, but you remain. Hill called this living with definiteness of purpose. Someone who isn't moved by opinion, nor by doubt, nor by trends, but who walks in confidence because they already know who they are, where they came from, and where they're going. What we see today is people who claim to have faith, but live trying to prove it to the world, as if their spiritual worth had to be defended all the time. But the righteous don't argue. They reign, and not with brute force, but with aligned authority. Hill said the trained mind is like an inner government. It sets the course, sustains the decision, and silences the noise. What you need to understand is that in the spiritual realm, true authority doesn't shout. It remains. It doesn't beg. It declares. Heaven has already chosen who will overcome. The question is, will you stand in the place you were anointed, or keep trying to negotiate with the voices that rejected you? Because what Psalm 2 says is this: while the wicked rage, the anointed sits. While the world fights for control, the king is already enthroned. And Hill explained, the only way to defeat a purpose is to divert attention away from it. That's why the kings of the earth, today, those might be voices, distractions, cycles, inner resistance, want to break the bonds. They want to sever your connection. They want you to forget who you are, because they know that true power isn't in circumstances, it's in identity. But when you understand who anointed you, you understand your position, and that changes everything, because those who know where they're planted don't run around chasing validation. They reign from within. They lead with their mind. They speak from faith. And then what the world once called foolish begins to bow to the invisible decree of someone who never negotiated their throne with the noise of rebellion. Revealed identity is the seed of manifested authority. I will declare the decree. The Lord said to me, "You are my son. Today I have begotten you." Psalm 2:7. This verse isn't just the central moment of Psalm 2. It's one of the deepest spiritual codes in all of Scripture. God isn't simply affirming a relationship, He's activating an identity. Heaven isn't giving information, it's releasing position. When God says, "You are my son," He's not just offering comfort, He's legitimizing, He's unlocking a nature. He's saying, you're not just chosen, you were begotten. And that changes everything. Napoleon Hill taught that the greatest transformative power of the human mind lies in what he called a dominant self-image. Meaning, it's not what others think about you, it's what you think about yourself, especially when no one is watching. When God releases this word over the Son, He's building the framework of an identity that will be tested by kings, by nations, by systems, but it cannot be revoked. Hill affirmed, success begins when the mind believes it is already capable. Psalm 2 says it in heaven's language, "Today I have begotten you. You're not becoming. You already are." That's powerful. Because many are trying to walk in authority without first accepting identity. They want to reign without recognizing who birthed them. They want to manifest what is visible without aligning with what is invisible. Hill said the subconscious mind only responds to commands delivered with deep conviction, and no one walks in conviction without first having clarity of origin. God says, "You are my son." That's not poetry, that's spiritual DNA, that's foundational authority, that's root. Even more powerful, this has nothing to do with the opinions of the kings of the earth. They can mock, they can rage, they can try to break the cords, but the decree has already been released. The Son has already been begotten. The throne has already been filled. And what God is showing us is that those who know their identity live with stability, even in the midst of chaos. Hill explained that most people fail, not for lack of talent, but because they never fully define who they are. They change identities with every criticism. They shrink in the face of pressure. They quit at the first no. But the Son wasn't begotten to retreat. He was begotten to rule. And if you carry the Spirit, if you were born from above, then this word is also about you. You're not chasing the Father's approval. You were generated by Him, and that gives you the authority to remain calm while everything shakes. Hill wrote, "A mind that knows where it's planted is not moved by circumstances." The Bible agrees. Those who know they are sons don't beg. They declare, they don't shrink, they stand. That's why the psalmist says, "I will declare the decree." In other words, I didn't just hear it, I will speak it, I will affirm it, I will sustain it with my voice, what heaven already spoke in silence. That is faith, that is covenant, that is co-creation. Hill called this creative auto-suggestion. The Bible calls it prophesying what the Father has already established. The spiritual realm only respects those who know who they are, and those who live from that identity become unshakable, because they were begotten by a word that cannot be undone. Those who know who they are ask the impossible with boldness. Ask of me, and I will give you the nations for your inheritance and the ends of the earth for your possession. Psalm 2:38. This verse is not a suggestion, it's a command. God isn't saying, if you'd like, ask. He's saying, ask. As if to say, you've already been begotten, you've already been anointed. Now ask like someone who knows what they carry. And this shatters the theology of fear, the mindset of limitation, and the spirit of lack that prevents many from living like sons. Because here God sets no limits. He offers nations, ends of the earth, territory, expansion. Hill would call this limitless vision. Napoleon Hill wrote that the starting point of all achievement is a burning desire for something definite. And that's exactly what we see here, an invitation to align faith and purpose with an audacious request, not based on what we see, but on what's already been decreed. Hill taught, you don't get what you wish for, you get what you ask for with faith. Declare with conviction and pursue with persistence. Psalm 2 speaks the same language with one phrase, ask of me. Most people don't walk in the extraordinary because they pray like beggars. They speak to God as if trying to convince Him to release what He already promised. But this verse dismantles that posture, because God is saying, you are my son, I have begotten you, I have enthroned you. Now ask, because inheritance is not begged for, it's assumed. Hill called this a mindset of worthy alignment with eternal purpose. Ask of me is the place where faith and identity meet. And when that happens, the impossible stops being a wall and becomes a door. Because you stop asking based on what you can do and start asking from who you already are. Hill taught, the universe doesn't respond to what you hope for. It responds to what you demand in faith. And in Psalm 2, God is saying the same thing. You are my son. I have begotten you, now ask like it. But there's an unspoken truth here. Only those who are sure of their origin ask boldly. Those who still doubt their source, hesitate. Those who are still trying to prove themselves, limit themselves. Those who are still negotiating their identity, remain silent. But those who know they are heirs, ask for nations. They visualize territories. They declare possibilities far beyond their size. Hill called this directed imagination. The Bible calls it faith that sees the unseen. And both point to the same truth. You only manifest what your mind has the courage to ask for. If your prayers are small, maybe your identity is still chained. If your requests are timid, maybe your spirit still hasn't understood what the Father already decreed. But when you activate the truth that you were begotten to reign, you begin to pray with authority, declare with conviction, walk with boldness. And then, the nations become reachable, the ends of the earth become accessible, because heaven doesn't respond to effort. It responds to faith rooted in identity. True authority flourishes where there is reverence. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry, and you perish in the way. Psalm 2:12. This verse is an unexpected twist. After an entire psalm speaking of authority, decree, inheritance, and dominion, the Spirit ends with an intimate gesture, a kiss, a sign of reverence, an act of recognition. And what God is saying here is, you may be a son, you may be enthroned, you may carry a promise, but if you lose a surrendered heart, you lose everything. This is the perfect balance between authority and fear, between ruling and bowing, between identity and humility. Napoleon Hill called this submission to infinite intelligence. He said that true success is sustained only when a person learns to listen to the higher voice, the silent guidance that doesn't shout but leads. Hill noted that many fall not for lack of talent, but for pride, because the moment they reach a certain level, they break the connection with the source that put them there. And Psalm 2 ends with that exact reminder, kiss the Son. In other words, remember who placed you there. You may be anointed, you may carry promises, you may have received the decree, but without reverence, you perish in the way. Hill wrote, spiritual pride disconnects the mind from the creative frequency. The psalmist had already seen it. Because authority without fear becomes arrogance, purpose without surrender becomes empty ambition, and power without reverence becomes ruin. That's why the psalm says, rejoice with trembling, meaning take pleasure in obeying, find joy in staying aligned, honor the source while you manifest the fruit. Kiss the Son is more than worship, it's voluntary surrender. It's acknowledging that even in authority, you remain dependent. It's deciding that no earthly throne is worth more than the Father's presence. Hill said the greatest leaders he studied had one quiet conviction in common. They were not the center. They were cooperating with something greater. The Bible calls that the fear of the Lord. Not terror, but reverence, alignment, a deep recognition that without the source, the throne is empty, the decree is unstable, the mission is short-lived. This is the final key of Psalm 2. After revealing decree, identity, inheritance, and dominion, it calls us back to the altar, to remind us that any authority that doesn't bow to the Son will be broken, and any son who forgets to kiss the Father gets lost along the way. Hill would say, the arrogant mind breaks the prosperity cycle because it ignores divine instruction. Scripture calls that resisting the Spirit. The outcome is the same. You lose what was already released. But the psalm ends with a promise for those who understand. Blessed are all who take refuge in him. In other words, those who sit but remain surrendered, who ask for nations but keep their knees bent, who rule with power but keep their hearts soft. Those do not perish along the way. Those cannot be shaken. Those will prosper, because those who trust endure. You weren't born to fight for space. You were begotten to reign with reverence. Psalm 2 is not just prophetic poetry. It's a spiritual blueprint. It starts with rebellion and ends in reverence. It walks through authority and returns to the altar. From decree to surrender, from opposition to the throne, from promise to obedience. And all of this exists to remind you of one thing. You don't need to prove what heaven has already decreed. You just need to remain where you've been planted. Napoleon Hill said that the most dangerous kind of success is the one that disconnects you from the source, that the most vulnerable mind isn't the one that doubts, but the one that forgets. And Scripture confirms this with ancient clarity. Kiss the Son. In other words, honor the origin before trying to inherit the destiny. Don't try to walk in verse 8 if you ignore verse 12. Don't ask for the nations if you haven't learned to bow. Because inheritance can only be sustained by honor, and promise is only fulfilled through submission. You were begotten. You were chosen. You were enthroned. Now the question is, will you trust enough to obey? Will you love enough to surrender? Will you reign with wisdom or resist with pride? Hill would say, "The world bows to those who bow before the invisible." And Psalm 2 responds, "Blessed are all who trust in him." Today, the call is clear. Break the cycle of mental agitation. Reject the voice of doubt. Abandon the false humility that keeps you from asking, and enter the throne room with authority and with fear. Ask, declare, believe. Expand, but kiss the Son. Remember who you are, and more importantly, remember who you came from. Declare this now. I was begotten to reign. I will not trade my throne for the voices of agitation. I ask for nations by faith. I serve the King with reverence, and I remain unshaken because I trust in the one who called me. If this word struck your spirit, like this video, share it with someone who needs to remember who they are, and comment below, "Today I kiss the Son, and I remain as one who has already overcome." This is episode 2 of our Psalms plus Napoleon Hill series, and we're just getting started. With every new psalm, a new key will be activated. With every verse, a new code revealed. And in every episode, a deeper part of your identity will awaken to reign, with decision, reverence, and divine purpose.